Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. Today, our guest is Jeff Butler, my buddy. Welcome, Jeff.
Appreciate it, Josh.
So I met Jeff because he's a public speaker, and our friend Ryan, our mutual friend, Ryan hooked us up. And so the official bio on his website is that Jeff's a public speaker and he helps bridge generational gaps between millennials and companies looking for their talent and patronage. I would say his specialty is he helps old people get along with young people in the workplace. That's the way I would put it. He's done over 125 keynotes at lots of industry events, as well as corporate speaking gigs at places like Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, Wells Fargo. He's presented at TEDx twice, and he's the author of 2 books, The Authentic Workplace and The Key to the New You. And he's also authored over 100 articles on workplace dynamics. He's been featured in Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur, Business Insider, Fast Company, HR News, and more. And before Jeff founded his workplace consulting company, he spent almost a decade in Silicon Valley working as a software engineer. But now he lives in Boston, Massachusetts with his family. Yeah. So we're going to talk to Jeff about the books he's written and how those have helped him with his speaking career and his business. But I got a few other things I want to talk to Jeff about. First of all, I was on his website and I saw that he trained for the 2012 Olympics under 3-time Olympian Tori Gustafsson, and he was only 15 pounds away from breaking a world record in pull-ups. So I want to know about these feats of strength. Okay. So first things first, tell me about this, Jeff.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect those when you first see me. I mean, I'm 6'3", 230, but I don't really stand out as a world record breaker. But yeah, so college, I went to UC Berkeley, and it turns out my family chiropractor was a 3-time Olympian. Who would have thought, Olympians need to make money too. And in track and field, you don't make that much money. So paired up with him, and he thought I had some decent level of talent. So I started working underneath him for a while. And with his help, I ended up going to state with my first year on track as my last year in high school. And I got picked up by Cal on there. And so I started training for the Olympics at that time, but computer science paid more than a contract from Nike. So yeah, I mean, you can't have both. When you take computer science at Cal, because they're like ranked number 2 next to Stanford, and then MIT is number 1. So it's like, what are you gonna do? I'm not a genius, so I gotta study actually.
Well, it's pretty interesting stuff to put in your resume, right?
Yeah, just a little fun fact there.
All right. Now, the other thing that we were starting to talk about before we started recording, and we were like, we should start recording before we talk about this, is that Jeff has a career as a public speaker. Like, this is his thing. Mm-hmm. And we're living through COVID right now when people can't travel and all this stuff's been shaken up. So catch me up, Jeff. Like, how has your business been hit by COVID, and what are you doing to adjust?
So to adjust, this is my friend's closet. I'm homeless. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it was interesting because as a speaker, so when we first talked, I was 100% my revenue was through speaking. That's it. And when I traveled, so my team is located all over the world. And so at the end of the year, I flew everyone out to an island and I met with them and they said, hey, you got to do this for other people, right? That was right when we started working together there. And I still haven't really figured it out at that point. Like, okay, an appointment there, some appointments. I know it was like slow. There's 1 or 2 that were remotely interesting to you, but it wasn't enough to really justify a service. It was good, but it wasn't like, okay, this is amazing, right? That was kind of like where our working relationship was there.
Yeah, I was like your first guinea pig, right?
Yeah, I was the first person who actually started trying it out for me. You started booking you appointments and you got a little bit of traction here and there, but
yeah, we were both trying to figure it out, what we were doing.
And so during that time, they said you have to do this for other people. So Grapevine ended up getting back to me and some people started asking for the service. I reached out and I used some LinkedIn techniques that you showed me, landed some clients who are paying me good amount of money and start providing for other people. Because of that, yes, we are able to bring in revenue through speaking, but the consulting started to expand on there. And what was interesting is that the speaking world, right? March hit for everyone, and third week of March, I probably lost, several, like 5 figures, easy, just from everything that fell through. Massive contracts, like done or rebooked. It was horrible.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had the client base, and I had to really tune in how to actually, book other speakers and make that happen. And so now what started to take place, so I had these couple of clients that were working from there. What I'm doing actually is appointment setting. It's standard outsource appointment setting. And what happened was a large corporate insurance company, who the CEO was actually a client of mine, said, you have to do this internally. And right when I presented to their whole C-suite and they loved the idea and we signed the contract recently, I realized, okay, this is like, I got something going here that's bigger than speaking. And now we're launching the Trainee Fix brand on there. And yeah, we're going to make it happen. And it's like, because price point for speakers, you can't really afford that much. But like, let's say you have a larger company and their deal size is $20,000, $30,000. If you provide a service of this and you book them a certain number of appointments, they're going to get a much higher ROI than say a speaker who would, it's a long sales cycle for us, right? You have to be, 9-6 months for a complete, booking cycle on there. And the deal size, right? Let's just say on average is $7,500, $5,000 for there, because you get a 10 grand, maybe it's a free gig. So it's varied versus say you're selling a SaaS product, right? You're looking at least like $30,000 for each one. And sometimes that's recurring, right? So it's different levels. So it's just same service, put it somewhere else and making it happen. So survive that.
Right. You've moved from Silicon Valley programming to being a public speaker to helping other people become public speakers to now appointment setting.
Well, appointment setting, but the thing is I use the degree and I actually built a complete like AI, basically automated machine that goes out and is able to pull all this data. And this is what I was coding during COVID. I was like, got some time, let's code. No, but it's actually, I had to lay off some employees. So I had to figure out how do I actually find the leads now. So I literally wrote all this code. And now I can just say industry, finance, and it basically goes out, grabs all these different finance leads and gives it to the appointment setting team. So
interesting.
Yeah, that's the computer science thing helped out with, but that's the same thing for any other industry, right? Like even in your space, you have to know certain people that you reach out to, or maybe your insurance place, you need to reach out to controllers, same exact formula.
Wow. So in a way, I mean, COVID's forced you to pivot and now you've got an entirely new business in a way, right?
I guess so, man. Yeah, but it wasn't my idea. It was my employee's idea. And then the clients told me to do it. I didn't sit down and say, I want to do this. It's like, I want to do speaking, but I figured out the system side to the point where it works. And to kind of give you a juxtaposition, when we were working together, I think it was booking you like 1 or 2 appointments a week, correct?
Yeah, something like that.
So for our clients right now, they're around like in a month, like 18 to 20. Right, with that. Just to kind of give you like, I had to really improve it, but it took months, man. It wasn't like this overnight thing of eureka.
It's interesting how the coding stuff keeps coming back. I mean, once you learn how to code, you see the world through that lens. And so you get confronted with a problem. You're like, hey, I can code my way out of this.
That's true. Yeah, my girlfriend's getting a master's degree and they had regex. So it's like this regular expression matching. And I had to do her homework for her because her and her partner couldn't figure it out. So it keeps coming back.
Yep. That's a valuable skill. Well, cool. Well, this will be interesting because we're going to talk with you about your books, which were written a few years ago. So it was in a different paradigm. I mean, you didn't know you would be doing today what you were doing back then when you wrote the books, but it'll be interesting to explore this and see how those books helped and maybe where you're going to go with writing in the future. So before we jump into the book specifically, tell us a little bit more about your background. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Where do you come from? What's your background like?
Come from my mom. I hope so. At least I was told. Silicon Valley, and I was just south of San Francisco, probably an hour, in a small town called Los Gatos. That's where I was born. And my parents are both software entrepreneurs, so they built and sold companies. They recently had their second ones acquired by Front Door, not Next Door, but Front Door, the company. So they acquired them, and now my mom's a director over there. And so I got to see at a young age how companies work, how to outsource, how to, build certain things, but I didn't really pick up on it until later of why that's important. Went to UC Berkeley, as I mentioned before, studied computer science, did track there for a bit. Then I worked in Silicon Valley at that time, software engineer, but the kind of lean into one of your questions on there is when I was first in that.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
You make a lot of money working as a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and your family's there. So I want to know, why are you not still in the Bay Area?
Yeah. So there's a few parts of that story. So the first part is why I left a six-figure job. Six-figure meaning I was graduating, I had like $105,000 base. That doesn't include bonuses. As a software engineer,
you can almost pay the rent with that in Silicon Valley, right?
You know what? My rent was $1,700 because I had this 350 square foot studio that did not have a dishwasher. I had a gas stove though, which was nice, but it was literally this big.
Postage stamp.
Yeah, super small, man. Girls loved it when I'm like, hey, here's where I live. Bye. It wasn't too good. But fortunately, my girlfriend stuck with me even through that. But point being is, so had that job, and what hit me was I was sitting next to someone who was a let's just say senior engineer, right? That's all you need to know. They were there for probably 10 more years in the space of engineering, 10 to 15, and they were earning 170. And I sat back and I thought, okay, well, I know about taxes, I know about personal finance. My take home right now in this position, because I've been paying a ton of taxes, is $5,200. In his position, then I'm going up to maybe 7,000, maybe 7.5. Am I really going to wait 10 or 15 years to increase my take home income $2,000? And that scared me.
When you put it that way, it doesn't sound that appealing.
Right. Most people are like, wow, 170. It's tax brackets. Yeah. It's people forget about that. Sure, it's nice, but the problem is I wanted more control. And on top of that control aspect, I also wanted to do something that was going to push me to the brick. Just because I had this obsession of okay, let's see what I can really squeeze out of this thing called life. And as a software engineer, you can only read so many books. And in that cubicle, some people really enjoy that style. For me, I liked it, but not enough to devote my heart to it. Because when I was in the computer science field, during the lunch breaks, I was reading books from Warren Buffett or certain business books on how to market certain things. I had this business fascination, which was different. So that's when I sought out to build my first company. Cool.
So you built some businesses before you became a public speaker, right? Tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial activity there.
Yeah. So I built, my first company was a tech company called H&D Data Provider. And what we did is we provided hazard disclosure data to people who are buying commercial real estate properties. Really, it sounds really interesting, I know. And that's the reason why I'm not doing it.
So did you sell that business?
Yeah. So I left after it was probably 18 months or so. I was making some money, but it wasn't for me. So I gave the shares to the other partners and I just left. And that's where I stumbled into speaking.
Gotcha. So tell us about that. How did you stumble into speaking?
Literally stumbling as in I went down my bucket list because I didn't have a job. I didn't have the company at the time. So I literally hated that stuff so much as a full-time thing. Because I left my day job, worked all on that. Went down my bucket list and number 14 on there was public speaking. So I went into a Toastmaster meeting that was literally a quarter mile away in a classroom. Right? That's how close I was to campus. Literally walked up, not stumbling. I wasn't drunk, but I just walked in there. Went to the Toastmasters event, talked for there's a 1 to 2 minute section where you have to be asked a question. You had to answer whatever that question is in an impromptu speech. I spoke for 52 seconds. I didn't even make it to 1 minute. That's how scared I was. And I sat back down after that talk or impromptu speech. And I realized I want to do this for the next 10 to 20 years of my life. It just hit me.
You were hooked.
Yeah. I mean, the level of adrenaline but the ability to convey an idea in a high risk situation really appealed to me.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, you want to be pushed to the edge, and that pushed you to the edge, and you felt that, and you're like, I like this.
Yeah, I was hey, where's that meth? No. It's well, give me more. No.
No, it is kind of a drug. It is addictive, huh?
It is,
So,
yeah.
so how did you go from that to actually getting paid to speak?
Good question. So after that meeting, I sat down and I said, I want to be on TEDx. And within 4 months, I got on there. And that was just through a lot of hustle and applying to a bunch of places. Applied to 20 places, 18 rejected me, 2 accepted. From there, it was hard to go paid because I thought people cared about smartphones, but they really don't as much as they take up time. So I literally tried to make this failing smartphone seminar idea that just there was no money behind it. And the way where I was able to make it an actual business is that I paired up with a friend of mine who set a sales record at his company. I told you this before, Josh, but for the listeners, basically I had a friend who worked for a software company, set the record there working full time, but on the off hours, he had a 6-figure ebook business under a fake author name that had 30 employees, and no one online knew who the actual author was. And he had all these assistants. And I said, dude, if I can get like those assistants or just something of that nature in my speaking business, I can build something. Gave him a percentage of my revenue. And he started coaching me on this. A long friend, he grew up in the same town as me. In fact, his parents live half a mile away from mine. So knew him for a long time. I pivoted from technology, smartphone, whatever stuff to millennials because large market. And I was a millennial, so people said you should talk about generational things. Fine. First year, we broke 6 figures. And it's because we pivoted to the market, but then more importantly, we solved the main problem, which is you will make more money doing something if you are talking to more prospective buyers. You increase that equation, you get booked more. You decrease that, you don't, right? It's just like consulting. You want more clients, you have to talk with more prospective people. If you want to double that down, have less of those meetings. That's literally what it is. And we tweaked it to really solve that problem.
And when you're doing public speaking, you're in front of a lot of people, right?
Yeah, and you're talking to more people.
Yeah. Cool. So what was the inspiration then to say, I need to go write a book? You're doing speaking, you're getting paid for this. What inspired you to say, I need to write a book?
Credibility. And there's the credibility factor, but there's also just the, let's do something that no one else in my family did. Like, let's really see if I can do this, because I wasn't really an academic growing up, even though I have a decent degree. And it was something that, only the smart people could do. And I was like, hey, what if, right?
So how'd you get started? What was your first step?
First step was figuring out what the heck I was going to write about. And once I decided that, and I was speaking to the youth market, right? I didn't take a long story and make it really short, but before I went into technology speaking, I thought I could speak to high school students. Bad idea. Mm-hmm. They're very tough. They don't care. They're tougher than executives. I wrote a book for high school students on tools that can help them become the person they want to be. And I took a lot of the principles I knew in psychotherapy and really broke it down to simple things that they could apply in their everyday life on there. The process of going about it, I sat down, looked at what the market had, decided what I knew, found that overlap, and then devised an outline. In that outline, I took out each chapter and I wrote out just titles, right? And just decided, okay, here's the flow of the book that I want it to be. From there, I broke it down one level deeper. And then each chapter, I would maybe have one page that would have all the bullet points for that chapter. So maybe subheaders on there, for lack of a better word.
And were you following any guide or reading any books? Did you have any instruction, or were you just doing this?
I was like, what the hell are you supposed to do? Well, I guess the books I read a ton, so I kind of knew how books were formatted. Mm-hmm. So literally I would take a piece of paper like this and I would just write out like bullet points of the chapter, right? And literally on paper. And then once I had all the chapters built out, which then I had about like 14 pieces of paper, I then put that on Word doc. And from there, I was actually working at that time when I was first starting to write. I would wake up I think 2 hours earlier before I went to the gym, before I would go to work, and I would write 1,500 words, 15 to 2,000 words. So within a month, I already finished writing it, and then the editing process kicked in.
Mm-hmm. So then when it came time to publish, what did you do there? If you're flying blind, were you looking at all the options? You're just like, man, what do I do
flying
here?
blind, like I was somewhat resourceful. So I actually, when I hired an editor, they knew about self-publishing. I just asked them, so what do I do now? And he's like, oh, you should go in Createspace and publish it there. I said, okay, do you know how to do that? Yeah. Well, can I pay you to do that? Sure. That's literally what happened. And he helped me design it too, because at least he knew.
And for listeners, Createspace is now today known as Amazon KDP. They absorbed Createspace a few years ago, but Createspace used to be the primary self-publishing platform to get your book up on Amazon. So you went on Createspace and your editor helped you step through the process.
Yeah, but the editing process was actually, I don't think you knew about this, but before I actually hired someone I paid, I got a bunch of my friends who I thought were smart, and I added them to the Google Doc, and I said, can you help me edit my book? Like, I'll buy you dinner or something. Like, this is literally what I was doing.
So you crowdsourced the editing?
Yeah, and so there's a girl who really liked me, so she was very helpful on the editing, but I realized that she wasn't the best editor. But I didn't realize that until I got a little better at writing. That's more in retrospect. I noticed before it was like anything I wrote down that someone gives me feedback on, I have to change because I don't know what I'm doing. That was the initial writer's mindset. And then I had a friend who was actually applying for a PhD and now works at Amazon. And he actually went through the whole thing. And I think I paid him a little money too. And I mentioned him in the foreword because, good gym friend who I worked out with, decent writer. And yeah, he actually went through the whole book. And my sister too added her in. So whole group effort, crowdsourced editing.
Yeah. So once you got the book done, this is your first book. You said you wanted to write it because you wanted more credibility. Did it give you the credibility you were looking for?
I think permission-based, yeah. Like now I can kind of give myself permission to feel like I have somewhat of an idea of what I'm talking about. But in the eyes of, say, an event planner who might be booking me, it was okay. But then when I realized that a lot of people have books, a lot of people have fake ghostwritten books, you don't know. And I think a lot of it, to answer your question, yes and no. In some respects, it's like, great, you have a book, but it wasn't like, oh, you don't have a book, you don't know what you're doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a given that you're going to have a book if you're a speaker maybe, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee the sale.
Exactly.
So was that part of the motivation for writing a second book, that you wanted to write something better, or what was the story behind writing the second book?
I went into the corporate world and I realized that I didn't have necessarily a book that really encompassed what I was talking about on stage. And I thought it could be an easy way of, let's say, a mutual sell where they book me, they can also buy books as well, which it actually does happen quite a bit. And that's when I wrote The Authentic Workplace on there.
Gotcha. So tell us a bit about writing that book and what the process was like. With everything that you learned from the first book, how did that flow into making the second book better?
I actually had the same guy put it through Createspace. That was just before they ended. So I got that guy covered. He also helped me with the typography in there, which I didn't know was a big deal. But it's actually a really annoying thing when you have a book is the typography phase, and all the editing of all the formats and all that, but that's a different conversation. How I did it differently, I knew the format, I knew the formula. I was like, bang, bang, bang. My knockout time was probably half the time for that book on there. And when you're like halfway through the book, you start building some serious momentum. And I guess it might be from the way that I broke it out, which I had all the bullet points of here's what I want to attack. And if that's written ahead of time, you don't have to impromptu, decide which direction you want to go. And that only works for nonfiction. Maybe if it's fiction, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of do that because I know the characters, interact differently once you flesh them out more, and that really might take the story in a different direction.
Right. Now, when you were writing these books, was this just coming out of your head, or were you doing research? Were you interviewing people? Were you looking at all sorts of other sources? Where did you get the material for these books?
A lot of it from the speaking that I was doing and the research I did there. So like, let's say I had to go into and speak to garbage collectors or something, right? I would read an interesting case study about that's supported a certain point. Remember the case study, I would document it. And then the book, I would like, oh, that's a great place for that particular case study. And you add it in there. So it's kind of like I took all that research I was doing during speaking and was able to apply it in the book.
There's an author, Nancy Duarte. She writes about how when she writes a book, she actually creates a PowerPoint presentation first, and that's her outline. That's how she outlines a book, is by doing a presentation. As a speaker, it sounds like there was a little bit of that going on as well for you, in that you looked at these presentations and you're like, hey, I can take this and I can put this into the book. Did you ever use that as an actual tool, though, to outline the book or PowerPoint? To organize your thoughts? Yeah.
Never.
Slide decks?
The reason why is that when you are trying to be creative, I don't want to deal with some sort of tool that's going to restrict that freedom, right? And the interface of PowerPoint might not be as quick as I need it, right? Like, let's say you have a quick thought and it's like, okay, let me get the line thing. Should I have an arrow? It's like you have to go through all these things, which on a piece of paper you can just draw it, which is why I prefer pen and paper. And once I've really emotionally and also intellectually, logically committed to whatever's on the paper, then I would go more and do the PowerPoint. And this is actually how I write presentations: paper first, then I would do the PowerPoint. Now I'm going through the PowerPoint, it actually changes again, because then I realize the flow is not the best in certain places. But I wouldn't start at PowerPoint because I feel like that's really constrictive.
Yeah. Now, you've written a lot of articles as well for different publications, right?
That's correct.
Were you able to reuse some of that content for your books?
I wrote a lot of those after that first book, but the content does echo in there. But yeah, I was able to use similar content from those.
Now, when the books came out, what did you do in terms of marketing? Or was marketing really a focus? Or was it more like, hey, I do speaking, by the way, here's my book? Or was it something where you were trying to promote these books and really get them out there?
Here's my speaking. I'm speaking. Here's my book.
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't, I knew this was my New York Times best-selling book. So I didn't really want to invest a lot of money on the marketing side. It was more just a tool for, if I'm on stage, here's more information on there. Maybe later on, 2021, I try and go after the New York Times bestseller list. I have the team for it. I can give it a shot, but that would take a slightly different approach, because then you have to look at all the different avenues of marketing the book.
Right. So that might be a good segue into, what does the future look like in terms of being an author? Do you have ideas for books that you want to write in the future?
Yeah, there were a few that I had, but it really kind of depends on the brand itself, because you sort of want them to be aligned on there. And there's things I used to have called neurological warfare, and it was looking at how technologies like cracking the code for our minds. That's not really on brand anymore. I love to write it. I love to do the research on what's really happening behind the walls of Google and Facebook on there. Not a really good point. I had another idea, which was called Machine Breaker, and that was something like Machine Breaker or something. And I was looking at similar to what what's his name had, growth hacking. The guy who loves
Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, the guy who's like, I feel like he's just super believes a lot in himself. Ryan Holiday, yeah, and he. It's similar to growth hacking on there, but looking at how you can actually exploit certain systems, whether that's in like marketing or sales and whatnot. Like what we did is, in terms of, instead of doing, say, 20 emails to get event planners on the phone, it's like, why don't you just turn the dial up on like one little part of the system, and then you officially like break the system because you outdo it. Same thing I did with TEDx. I'm like, I don't want to apply to 3. Let me just apply to 20. And it turns out that worked. So it's a lot of like that side. That could be an option, but they're ideas. But the thing is the next book I'm going to write, I'm going to make sure I do a lot of research beforehand, so I understand the market and say, okay, I can't say for sure if this is going to work. But what I can do is understand the market need. Like if I publish a book right now on remote work, it will get some hits because everyone's thinking about remote work. But if I talk about, say, let's try something like generations, right? I didn't tell you this. Did I tell you about Wiley Publishers and they approached me?
No, tell us about that.
Okay, so I had traditional publisher approach me. And, this is like every author's like starting dream. Oh my gosh, a big name, because they're top 10, right? Biggest publishers out there and pretty big for business books.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. I'm like, this is a hoax, And I looked up the domain. It's the actual site. I'm like, okay, it's not from India or someplace trying to scam me.
Yeah, because most of the time you have to write like a proposal letter and you have to go through this huge process and you have to get rejected 30 times. So for a publisher to approach you, it's like, wait, what?
Yeah, like what's the catch? And I found the catch, but I'll get into that in a bit. So I talked with the guy and I was like, oh my gosh, Wiley Publishers, I can't, because I had all these books in my bookshelf. And it's like, Wiley Publisher, Wiley Publisher. Like, oh my gosh. Well, the interesting thing was I talked to them on the phone and they weren't interested in me because I had 7,000 visitors to my blog every site. They didn't care about that. They were like, oh, you did 56 engagements last year, right? Like, yeah. And there's like 100 people in those crowds each one? Oh, yeah. Well, what if we like published a book with you and you could sell your book at each one? Can you do that? I'm like, maybe, yeah, why? Well, if we're going to work together, I think that would be a really good approach. Oh, okay. And so I sat down and I was writing out, okay, so the split they offered, right, was actually quite high. They weren't going to offer me a advance for obvious reasons. An advance, I don't know if you cover this much, but basically if you are a really good author and you have a good following, they'll pay you some money up front so you can write the book. But then once you publish the book, you have to sell as many copies on there and you won't earn any money until you cover that advance. So it's kind of like a weird loan.
Yeah, a lot of people who are new to the publishing world, they hear about an advance and they think, oh, that's great. I get like a down payment and a bunch of money and then I get book royalties too. And it's like, no, if you don't earn back that advance, you can actually end up in trouble. I mean, depending on how the contract is worded, they might give you an advance. And if you only earn half the advance back, you might have to pay back the other half or something. Yeah. One of my friends, Ben Hardy, he got a $220,000 advance from Hachette for his first book. Whoa. And I was like, man, that would be an interesting contract to read through to see what their expectations were about how he would perform on that. Because like that's a huge commitment to take that on.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So they offered you a split though. Where
they offered me a split.
Explain that.
Split compared to industry was actually pretty good. They said 20% them, 80%. Sorry, not 20% them. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. 80% them, 20% me. At a certain point in the beginning, it was about 1585 on there. And I sat down and I said, what if I just self-published these books, right? And I looked at how much money I can make per book. And like, if you put on Amazon for one book to be shipped out, it's like $350, right? Yeah. You charge $15 for it for an event planner or someone, or maybe $20, you can earn maybe $15 profit. Let's say $10 profit on each book, right? If you do Wiley on there, let's say they sell the book for $20, you're only getting $4.
Yeah. Right.
So I said, well, if I'm going to sell maybe 20,000 books, right? That's 20,000 times the 4 on there. That's $80,000. And let's try it at 10 times the 20,000. That's $200,000. I'm like, no. Like, I told him, like, I didn't say no, but I was like, hey, maybe at a later time because I have to build up my consulting company right now. So if I want to go back and just have a Wiley publishing name, sure. I don't know what that would really do, though, for my brand, because I haven't had a traditional publisher on it.
Right. It's interesting because when I talk to people who have been only traditionally published, it means a lot to them. But when I talk to people who have only self-published, they're like, why would I want a traditional publisher? And the only reason I've been able to get out of people as to why they go with traditional publishers is the advance, if they get an advance, and distribution, because there is the distribution factor of getting in airports or bookstores. But in your case, you'd be selling all the books yourself. They'd be doing nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, why would you give them 80%?
And they were like, well, we provide, a copywriter and like a designer for the book cover. And I'm like, you don't think I've done this before? Like, I had to pay for the last one. Like, you don't think I know the numbers? Like, yeah. I know how much it costs to do that. And is it,
And-
yeah.
I mean, there is something to be said for that, them providing those services and such, if
Yeah.
you can't go pay for it yourself. And I know Ryan Holiday, he says one of the reasons he works with the publisher is because they hold him accountable.
Mhm.
And so it's like he knows he has to get the book done because he's made that commitment. But if you can make and keep your own commitments, if you can go hire your own people and you know how to do it, you eliminate a lot of those things immediately.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you went through that process and actually turned down a major publisher, but good on you.
I know you weren't expecting that on this call. I thought I told you that.
No, I love that you were able to bring up that story. That's great. But you were also smart that you didn't burn the bridge because...
No, because like, what if the consulting company goes, well, I got this extra money coming in. It's not a big of a deal. I probably would want a traditional publisher on my name just to be like, hey, I have this mark. Because I have a buddy, Adam Smiley, who's a speaker on the same subject, and he doesn't do any outbound marketing. He gets booked like 20, 30 times a year, and they're at big name companies. Like, he just spoke at Verizon. Like, that's hard for me to get. And a lot of it's attested to, he has some Penguin Publishing House, right? They offered him a $60,000 advance because he wrote the book, The Core Life Crisis, sold like 30,000 copies. They gave him the advance on there. Hey, you want to put it under Penguin? Fine. They did it. And a lot of those distribution channels really started getting booked on there. And he had a TED Talk that has over 1 million views right now. So guy's doing something right there. So I don't think I have everything figured out at this point, but I think in the future, maybe when I have the time or more, like a ton of money, that's like, hey, you know what? I don't have to worry about this as much. Why not?
Yeah. Cool. I love that you were able to throw that story in there. So now you do a fair bit of reading as well, right?
That's true. I would say so.
How important would you say is reading to the quality of writing you've been able to put out?
Huge. When I just graduated college, I wouldn't read much at all. But right when I kind of made that switch in my career where I kind of had that moment with a software engineer next to me and realized I want to make this change, I started reading 2 to 3, it was like 2 books a week. It was really crazy level. And my reading comprehension was absolutely awful growing up, partly because dyslexia hit in. But as I started to read more, my ability to understand more difficult concepts grew. And I didn't expect this, but it's kind of like, I think the channel you're going down, my writing improved as well because I started seeing how authors were putting together sentences and phrases. And then when I was looking at my own writing, I'm like, oh, I need to change this on there. And that started to grow. And I think so that's, I can accredit a lot of that. And the quality of your reading, like, let's say if you're just reading easy books, like I love Brian Tracy, but Brian Tracy's written for audiences that are relatively easy. You're not going to challenge yourself as much as say you pull out Steven Pinker, right? And then you're like in a dictionaries next to you the whole time and you're looking up, a different word every, page, right? So they challenge you in different ways.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite books that you've read recently? Fiction, nonfiction, anything?
Gosh, this is gonna be super political. I'll say because of the times, I found myself reading Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics. Funny enough,
I love Soul.
Yeah. So it turns out at that job I told you about, the guy who sat next to me, who was earning a bunch of money, the person on the other side, who was my buddy, gave me that book back in like 2014. I never opened it until like recently. And I read it and it was such a great overview of economics and different concepts like rent control on apartments. And what does that really do to the impacts of the economics of the surroundings? I thought it was just absolutely fascinating read. And he's quite the established thinker of today. And it's sad because I feel like he's one of the few right now that are really like strong in the academic sector who has like a lot of published books behind him.
Which book exactly did you read?
Basic
Basic
Economics.
Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
It's great stuff. It's not the hardest stuff to read, but it's not the easiest stuff to read either.
He writes very well because he can explain a very complex subject in a very simplified manner on there.
Yeah. But they're big books.
Yeah, that one was, I think, 700 or 600 pages I got to get through.
Yeah. And most people would say, man, the last thing I want to do is read a 700-page book on economics, but it is such interesting stuff because he is a talented writer. He knows how to make it interesting.
Yeah. So there's him. I don't know how you want me to, I can go for a long time on this. I don't know how long to focus on.
What about fiction? What's one of your favorite fiction books?
So I stay a lot out of fiction, but I think one of the more recent ones I read, I mean, I did the whole, 1984, Brave New World, that whole thing, but that was a while ago. Fiction, I mean, Ayn Rand's Fountainhead was pretty good. I don't really exactly agree with all of her philosophy, but it was pretty good. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite classics, Fahrenheit 451, right? Yeah. I love that. It's just such a great, he's a story worth sharing, man. That's an amazing story of a guy who, did you know about his upbringing?
I don't. Is there like a biography of Ray Bradbury? Or?
I find this absolutely fascinating. He didn't get a college education. In fact, what he did is he spent most of his time in a library. Literally, this is what he did. And he wanted to become a writer. So what he would do is he would consistently write these short stories again and again and again, because he knew that the amount of quantity will improve his quality over time. So he has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of short stories. And it wasn't until he really put in that volume, like it was deliberate practiced volume, that then he started publishing or getting actual attention for it. I thought that was just...
I got to learn more about this. Where did you learn this? Is there like a book or an article, or how do you?
You can check it out on YouTube on there, but I think I read it in one of the back of his books or something that was like that after you're finished with the book, and it just wrote a little bit about him.
Cool. I'm going to explore this because I love Ray Bradbury. I love Fahrenheit 451. Yeah. He has a book called The Halloween Tree. That's one of my favorite books that he wrote. It's just a short book. But yeah, amazing author.
Yeah.
Cool. Man, we have more intersecting interests than I realized before we started this conversation. Cool. Do you think that reading fiction is helpful for writing nonfiction?
Yes. I think that in nonfiction, what you have to do is, if you're going to portray a certain point, a case study, you can really see someone who writes fiction well is because they know how to break down a story or a particular instance because of the words they use and the engagement effect. And I absolutely hate writing fiction, but for my girlfriend, one time I actually wrote a short story for her birthday and narrated it and had it all recorded for her. And the level of detail that you have to put in there and understand the actual characters takes an enormous level of skill and attention to detail that's often missed in fiction or nonfiction writing. For instance, when you're going over a page and you're saying, well, this percentage of people do X, that's boring as hell. And if you think that you're going to actually engage readers, you need to stop writing completely. How do you actually show that in a animated, colorful format? That's where fiction becomes helpful, is that they can take a very simple topic and color it and spin it in ways that you would have never thought before. And I think if you really are serious about becoming a great writer, yeah, you need to read a lot of the great fictional pieces on there, because it'll give you an idea of how do you convey logic in an emotional way.
Are there any books that you've read about the craft of writing that have helped you as a writer?
I wish I could flip you around in my other room, because I have a whole bookcase right here. Yeah, quite a few.
What are some of your favorites?
So I read a whole bunch of books on comedy, because according to my girlfriend, my presentations weren't funny. And I saw the best presenters could be say really interesting thing, laugh, really interesting thing, laugh. And so I wanted to understand that. And I forget the actual names that come to mind, but I know if you go to the Toastmasters website and you look up, say, books on comedy, you'll find some of them, and they're really good reads. But I read about comedy. I have not read about writing fiction. I have read a bit about doing research and data. I'm reading through a discrete mathematics and probability book right now, just for fun, doing math problems.
Is that what you do on weekends? read
No,
books about math
I
problems?
my girlfriend likes that. She wants me to watch like the Haunted Hill House and stuff like that. Like I'm not a huge movie person, but she makes me watch things.
And you're like, I want to go in the other room and do some
I want
math
to go do math
problems.
problems.
I love this. Well, are there any questions that I should have asked you, Jeff, that I haven't asked you? Because I feel like you've brought up so many things that I wasn't expecting to have in this conversation. Now I'm just like, what should we be talking about that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I don't know if it really depends on what someone is tuning in to listen for, because each person on their path of writing is looking for something different on there. And hopefully, like, let's say if they're further along the path and they're choosing between self-published or traditional, hopefully turn down the path of, if it's their first book, just self-publish. And if you publish enough books, then you'll get the traditional publisher who will be like, yes, we want our name on the brand. But I think if you sell enough copies, you're not going to want a traditional publisher on taking those. That's kind of like the yin, not the yin yang, but the catch-22, which is also an interesting book. And I think when you're first starting out, there is a pragmatic process. I know you help people with that, being able to write that out. And for some people like me who are a little bit crazy, you'll just do it until it's done, and whether it's right or wrong. But I know the framework you probably provide people is pretty solid in that respect of how you actually break it apart. Is that correct?
Well, I hope so. But you did make me think of one more question, which is, when you were writing your books, did you ever get stuck? Did you ever get writer's block? And if so, how did you push through that?
I don't really get writer's block. And this is the weird thing. I have such like a low perception of myself that I just think like, it's okay the way it is. And I just keep going. But I think the times when someone might articulate a writer's block would occur is if you haven't thought through what you're going to say next. Because if you approach someone and maybe you're working with someone on a book and they have 3 chapters to write, if they have not blocked out anything in those chapters, they will get writer's block in the beginning because they're trying to articulate what that is. Because you notice what I did for my initial writing, I started very high level, and then I would take swings at it and go deeper and deeper each time. But each time I would go through, it's exponentially longer. First time, it's maybe 15 minutes. Next time, more detailed, it's 2 hours where I'm writing all the points. Then from there, even another more detailed outline on there. So I have basically a full scope of where I want to go on there. And I think that's how I avoid a lot of writer's block, is that I set a goal, write this many, and I have a pre-planned thing of what I have to cover. So where am I going to get writer's block? It's already set before me.
Yeah. I mean, 2 things stand out there. First of all, that you're doing an outline, which surprisingly a lot of people skip, even though everybody knows they're supposed to do an outline, but a lot of people don't do it. They're like, I'm just going to sit down, I'll just start writing, and then they get writer's block. You did an outline. The second thing that stands out is, like you said you have a low estimation of yourself, but what you're really saying is that you didn't care too much about what you were putting out in your first draft. It sounds like you were just like, you know what? I'm just going to get this all out. Tucker Max calls it a vomit draft. Yeah. I'm just going to get all this stuff out there, and then I can go back and clean it up. No big deal.
Yeah, that you cannot, for the first time that you're actually writing some material down, judge it. Just write it. And don't look back on there. Because when I write those 1,500 words, I'm not editing through it. I'm just going through. And if I spell something wrong, I might just do a little Grammarly, click, check. I'm not trying to look at for words on there that fit. I'm just going through. Can't find the right adjective? So what? Put the first thing that comes to my mind. Apples. Boom. Go. I'll come back later and I'll get to it. But the problem is most people, and I noticed this with my girlfriend, because she recently published a book. And she's a valedictorian. She was top of her class at our university. She just got into, Middlebury, right? And she full max scholarship. She's like ranked number 1 right now. Couldn't write. And I was like, the writer's block came up. And the problem was, this might be helpful, but people would write, say, a paragraph, but then go back to the beginning of that paragraph and say, no, it's not perfect.
Yep. And before they get it all out, before they get all their ideas out.
Over and over, they won't even get anywhere. It's like, look, you're supposed to, it's called rough. There's a reason why it's called rough draft. It's not draft. It's not perfection draft. It's rough. So just don't worry about it and go.
Yeah, this whole idea that your first draft has to be perfect, of course, that's going to stop you. I mean, I struggle with this. When I'm writing, I do edit as I go along, and I try not to, but it's hard. It's hard to not go back and be like, oh, wait, no, I want to do it this way. No, I want to word it this way. But if you're a perfectionist, it just gets that much harder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what's the book that she wrote?
It's called Destin de Exilio, and you can look it up. It's from, in Spanish, so DESDE, de Exilio. Baby?
Yeah, baby.
What's your book called? Like Destin de Exilio? How do you pronounce it? Destin de Exilio.
So from the exile.
From the exile. That's the English translation. So it's both Spanish and English, and it's written in poetry.
Gotcha. Cool.
That's super impromptu, huh? For a podcast to do that? I don't think anyone's ever done that during a podcast.
No, it's we'll give her a link in the show notes to her book as well. So.
Yeah, I think she's gotten way more Amazon reviews than me, and we'll leave this as a funny note on here. We can wrap this up on it. So she hasn't done much public speaking, and she just published her book, and I'm like, because we finally got it done. She got a whole bunch of copies, like 20 of them. And I said, oh, you should start speaking. Go ahead and speak at a Rotary Club. I spoke at one recently as an impromptu because they didn't have a speaker. I spoke and I said, oh, you should have my girlfriend come. CC them on an email. They love her. They bring her in. She brings all of her books. She tells her story. She gets in a room of like, Rotary clubs. They're like not known for like big stages. It's like 15 old ladies in a room. She finishes her 20-minute speech. They give her a standing ovation, and they buy all the copies, and they pay her more dollars for each book. And I'm sitting there like, I've never gotten a standing ovation. I'm a professional speaker. How dare you do like a standing ovation on the first time you get up and speak? But I was super proud for that day because I had to pull her in there, and that was a difficult one. But yeah, it was quite.
Maybe your next book should be poetry. Maybe you can get a standing ovation.
How to get standing ovation on your first time on stage? I should not write that one because I don't know what to do in that case.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for being a guest here on the show and putting up with all these questions. Appreciate it so much. Where's the best place for people to find you? My site at jeffjbutler.com. That's my speaking site. And Trinity Fix is the consulting site. Awesome. Thanks so much. We'll put all the links in the show notes and all that stuff. Thanks for helping us out here on the Published Author Podcast today.
Hey, sure thing, Josh. Pleasure's mine.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.